Hey guys, thank you so much for coming. I'm Gwen LaFantasy. I work for the ARF in membership, and I run the Young Pros group. Is anyone here for the very first time? Raise your hand. Awesome, welcome. And our advisory board, could you stand up please? So these are our Young Pros advisory board. About half of them, and they help to run this group. They program events. They had the idea to do VR. So if you're new and you haven't met anybody, look for their badges. They have a ribbon, or me, or ARF staff, raise your hand. So feel free to come and talk to us. We're really glad you're here. The Young Pros is geared towards young working professionals. We have events in New York about 8 to 10 times a year, focused on professional development, networking, education opportunities. So if you're not officially a member, there's an application you can fill out to share a bit about your interests, and then you'll get on our mailing list. The next event that we're going to have is going to be March 21st. It's a part of our annual conference. So our biggest event of the year is in Midtown Manhattan, March 20th through 21st. And all of the Young Pros are invited to come to the afternoon of the 21st. You'll get to see one of our keynote speakers, Jose Miguel Sokoloff, who got rid of the gorillas in Colombia through advertising. He's going to have a great presentation. And then we're going to have a special Young Pros session on leadership. So if you're not signed up, hopefully you'll come to that. All right. Anything else? Good. Okay. Without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker. Varun Shetty is the Director of Strategy and Business Development from the New York Times, and he leads business operations for their virtual reality team. So he's going to share with you some of the innovative work that the Times is doing with VR.
I didn't know where you were.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. Let's do that. Cool. So my name is Varun Shetty. I work at the New York Times, which is either failing or doing incredibly well right now, depending on who you ask. I say we're doing incredibly well. President says otherwise. But I sort of have two roles at the New York Times. One is that I work on the strategy and business development team there, really focused on BD. I work on large company scale partnerships. So a couple weeks ago, we announced that we're going to have a Snapchat Discover channel. That's the types of deals that I work on in that capacity. But really, I spend 99% of my time leading the VR team. The VR team at the Times is sort of an interesting creature. There are very few people at the Times that spend all of their time on VR. It's sort of, we have a VR editor who's full-time and someone else in the newsroom that's full-time. But otherwise, it's a little bit of someone from marketing time, someone from advertising, someone from operations. So I sort of help tie everything together. I'm responsible for making sure that the business is running properly, that we're publishing often enough for advertising and for our own editorial needs. So I'll walk you through basically some of the history of what we've done just over the last 14 months. And walk you through some of the things we've learned, what we think we're going to be doing in the future, and then just some open questions that we have. But up here, what I have are really sort of the three big takeaways from VR since we launched in November of 2015. I think the first one is really the headline, which is that when we do VR in our journalism, we really focus on these three things, which are place, presence, and access. One thing that's really important for us is when we tell a story in a new medium, the medium has to add something to it. So very often we'll go through pitches or go through ideas and we'll say, well, this could just be a feature, or it could just be a video, or it could just be a photo essay. But if it allows someone to have a better sense of place or presence or access, then we really know that it's a great VR idea. And I'll walk you through some examples that we've had to sort of highlight that. The other thing is that VR is complementary to everything that we do. It's not a replacement. One of our newsroom leads likes to tell the story that he tried on a Google Cardboard and was sort of blown away by it. And he realized very quickly that he needed to go into the newsroom and talk to journalists and get them excited about it. So he put this Google Cardboard on someone's head and they watched a 5-minute film and she took it off and she said, well, my job's obsolete now because she just writes articles. And I think what we found really quickly is that that's just not true. VR is good for some things, it's terrible for other things. And the written journalism, the photos, the videos, the graphics that we create all complement. And I think as the Times tries to become a more visual company, which just makes sense for younger audiences. It makes sense for mobile form factors. VR will play an important complement there. And I talked a little about this, but VR has to be additive. And so we've seen a couple of films that we've done sort of haven't really hit that mark, and you can tell right away. But we've done some great stuff where actually the VR helps tell the story better. So the example I like to use is in March of last year, the magazine wrote an article about a shooting that happened on the Texas-Mexico border. And a Border Patrol agent actually shot through the fence there and killed a young Mexican boy. And his argument was that this kid was throwing rocks at him and he feared for his life. When we went down there to film, you realize that the fence is 40 feet high. So this kid would have to be Aaron Rodgers, Joe Montana, to actually hurt this border agent if he was throwing these rocks over the film. And you could capture that in a video, but it's something special and unique when you're a viewer and you're looking around and you have to look up and this fence just goes on forever. And you realize the power of that story then, right? Which is that there's different interpretations to these things, but this sort of helps you get guided in the right direction. So, to get back to the place, presence, and access piece, one of the films that we published was called The Contenders, and we followed presidential candidates on the campaign trail. And these are some of my favorite films because they put you right in the middle of a media scrum, or they put you right in the middle of a rally or a town hall meeting. And usually when you see these things on video, the video is placed in the audience and you can only see the candidate. You get no sense of who's in the audience, how they're interacting. But if you're in the middle here, you can actually get a sense of the chaos of one of these events. So I must have watched the Donald Trump event 20 times, because when you're in the 360 space, I can spend one whole viewing looking at this person in the audience, and then another viewing looking at this person in the audience. And there's no sort of visual language that's forcing me to go one place or the other. So as a viewer, I'm sort of just free to explore on my own. I think, eventually that sort of language will be really important. And I know Facebook is thinking about putting sort of guideposts in these 360 films. So if someone really needs to look behind them at some point, a little indicator will pop up telling them that they need to. But these were great, and this was something that we turned around in a relatively short period of time. We filmed for a week, and then it was out the week after that. We actually filmed in Antarctica in December, and we're going to do a bunch of pieces that'll launch in April or May. And this sort of gives us a sense of place. Very few humans have gone to Antarctica. Actually, our video journalists and our reporters were stepping on pieces of land that no other human had stepped on in their life. So it's kind of cool to take a 360 camera down there and explore. We actually filmed underwater, and I watched the piece, a draft of the piece earlier this week, and it's kind of wild because it gives you this incredible sense of claustrophobia where you follow these divers. They're in their little hut on the ice in Antarctica, and there's a little hole there, and they drop down, and then the camera drops down, and you see this thick sheet of ice over you, and you immediately feel claustrophobic. In a good way where you want to keep watching, not throw up, but it just provides you with a sense of that you're actually there. And so this is another example of place. We did a film called The Modern Games, where during the Olympics last year, we took 4 or 5 moments from Olympic history and sort of dropped you in there. This is a really interesting shot because the film is a 360 film, but we didn't have 360 videography from the Olympic Games because the technology just wasn't there. But we were actually able to sort of recreate these 360 photospheres from all the archival footage we had. So we were able to find enough angles to sort of put a whole film together and drop you in when Usain Bolt's crossing the finish line, or dropping you in when someone's doing the long jump. VR also just tells stories in different ways. So earlier this summer, New York Times Magazine, for the first time, just published one very long essay, and it was 40,000 words long. It was a couple years of reporting, and the point of the reporting was sort of to walk people through how the Middle East has crumbled in so many ways over the last 30 or 40 years. And the reporter follows 7 people in 7 different countries and goes back decades and writes this really rich tableau where if you don't want to take a full college course on the history of the Middle East, this is probably good enough for you. But we also saw that this is a GIF of just how long it would take you to read this article. So it's still going, right? This is a day's worth of reading, and you get such rich texture out of it, but it still doesn't put you in a place. It doesn't tell you what it's like to be fighting the ISIS forces in Iraq as you try to overtake Fallujah. So what we did is we sent a photojournalist there this summer, and he actually embedded with the Iraqi special forces as they overtook Fallujah. So you could, read a 40,000 word article, or you could watch this film Fight for Fallujah, which is 11 minutes long, and actually have a sense that you're there on the ground with people, and you see mortars going off, and you see people ducking down as bullets whiz by them. So again, this is something where video can sort of get you there, but we think 360 does a much better job. So we have sort of two VR properties at the New York Times, and we call generally everything that we do virtual reality, but actually we haven't done any virtual reality yet. We've just done 360 video. There's no interactivity in what we're doing. There's no room scale stuff. There's no real-time render graphics. It's all just 360 video, and that's been partially because we understand our audience, and a lot of New York Times subscribers and readers, they don't have the hardware at home. They don't even know what 360 is. We sort of have to bring them along with us. And so if we started doing, Unity-based projects right away, 500 people would see them, and our subscribers would really not get it at all. So we decided, look, let's focus on 360 video. Let's focus on the easiest way to get these films out. Because even right now, just sort of holding your phone up in magic window mode and waving it around like this is kind of a cool experience. I still find it kind of cool, and I've put on headsets. So for our average reader, being able to do that's great. So we have two properties. One's NYTVR, and this is sort of magazine-style documentaries. These are longer experiences. We want you to put on a headset and watch these things. So they're 6 to 10 minutes long. We publish about once a month, and that's a function of just how long it can take to create these things, how much they cost, and the amount of reporting that we want to put into them. Cool thing about NYTVR is that we've sort of had some leeway to publish things that the New York Times would never publish before. So all the New York Times is news, but in NYTVR you can find some fiction. We've published a music video from Run the Jewels just because they created a great 360 experience, and we thought, well, we've got a pretty good distribution platform. It's early enough where we just want to highlight some great pieces in the medium, so we published that in. Last month, we published a VR adaptation of the new George Saunders novel, which is one of the biggest novels of the year, and we took just one scene from that book and sort of created a play that you could watch in the New York Times, which we would not get away with that anywhere else in the New York Times, but because VR is so new and it's a new medium and it's so visual, we're able to get away with that. The other big property we have is the Daily 360, and that's actually in partnership with Samsung. And as part of that partnership, what we're doing is we're filming one 360 film every day. So if you go to the homepage of the New York Times every day, if you open up on your app, you'll see a 360 film from somewhere in the world. The first film we shot was at an airstrike in Yemen, and you could see the rubble all around you. But the idea of the Daily 360 is to sort of provide someone with a better experience for the previous day's news. So the night that the Cubs won the World Series, we had a camera outside Wrigley Field, and you could watch and celebrate with people as the Cubs, broke the curse. The Daily 360 is really all about immediacy, and for the Times, it fits really well with our business model. We are a subscription business, and subscription businesses are predicated on people visiting every day and building a daily habit. So with the Daily 360, we thought this is a really great piece of innovative visual journalism. This is the type of thing where someone could come back day after day and then start to explore other parts of the New York Times. Operationally, it's an absolute beast, and I'm amazed that we were able to put it together. We have every single bureau, every single reporter, that's an exaggeration, every single bureau around the world has 360 cameras. And what we really want is for any time a journalist goes out in the field, they're already thinking about writing words, they have their phones with them, so they're thinking about taking photos. We want them to think, okay, how can I capture something in 360 as well? So those are the two big properties. When we've thought about success at the Times for VR, there's a few things that we've thought of. Number one is newsroom involvement. The newsroom at the New York Times is the beating heart of the place, and if journalists aren't interested in VR, it's just not going to happen. So the story I told you about putting a headset on someone's face, we've done that a lot, and we've just had to expose people to what VR is and get them excited about it. But with the Daily 360, we have grizzled veterans of the newsroom coming to us who have been there for 30 years asking, how can I learn how to use one of these Samsung 360 cameras, or how can I learn how to use a Ricoh Theta? These are a couple of folks from our graphics team who flew out to California. I had this idea where it would be great to shoot like a meditation series in VR. So if you're gonna get lost in a headset for 30 minutes, why not try to calm yourself down? So we went to California and shot 3 scenes, and this is the entire production team for this film. It's 2 people with a jump camera going out and filming something and being excited about it. The other thing is we're not going to do things if the audience doesn't respond to them. VR is the type of thing where there is a heavy investment in making this thing work and happen. So if the audience isn't super into it, we're not going to do it. We launched a separate app for VR experiences. So we have the NYT VR app, which is a cardboard app. It's also on Daydream. We're hoping to get it on Gear VR soon. So we built something from the ground up here, and that app over the last 13 months has over 1 million downloads. We see 50% of people returning every month. We see people watching a couple films a month, and we're only publishing 1 a month. So they're sort of getting back into the archives and watching more and more. And the time that they spend in the app is about 7 to 8 minutes, which is, I think longer than our average session in the New York Times mobile app itself. So it's really resonating with people. And we get pictures like this a lot during the holidays because people take cardboard home and they show it, they show their mom, they show their grandmother, they show their younger brother. And this was taken right after we launched The Displaced, which was a couple weeks before Thanksgiving, and we were just flooded with all these photos. So we feel really good about this. But again, most of these people don't have an HTC Vive in their house or an Oculus Rift in their house. So we've made a big bet on mobile VR, and I think we're going to continue to do that. Either mobile VR is going to get better, and you're going to be able to do positional tracking and more interactivity in it, or high-end devices are going to become cheaper. I'd bet on the mobile devices becoming a lot better, just because everyone has their phones with them all the time. But it's another interesting thing that I think about a lot, which is VR sort of runs contrary to so many of the user behaviors we see right now. Like when I'm watching the Oscars, I'm on Twitter and I'm streaming, I'm scrolling through my timeline, and then I'm probably watching a video about the Oscars on Twitter at the same time that I'm watching the Oscars. Whereas with VR, you are putting a headset on and it's just that attention. And I find myself getting super antsy, like 30 minutes into every experience, because I'm like phantomly trying to find my phone and open up Twitter. But we have to figure out what that user habit's going to look like and how we can properly connect with it. Another example of that is when we published our first couple of films, we published them at like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and sent a push notification to people. And then, we were surprised that no one was watching the films. And that's because people have jobs and they don't have headsets at their desk, and you get fired if you put your headset on. So we started publishing them, Thursday nights and sending push notifications on a Friday night or a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, where you're likely to just be at home hanging out. You have time to put a headset on. You're not sitting on the subway getting a push notification to watch a VR film. And then, the other thing with the Times is we have to figure out what the business model for this stuff is. It's expensive to make. The Times overall is just trying to be a lot smarter about when we go into new initiatives, what does this look like as a sustainable business? And VR, I think in 2016, was about investing some money as an experiment to see if that's the case. And we felt pretty good about that. So the business model behind this all right now is really advertiser focused, and we distribute advertiser films in the New York Times app. So if you have an asset, we will happily distribute it for you. If you don't have an asset, you can work with our creative studio and we'll build one for you. But I think this has been successful because there are so few VR platforms with reach right now. There are hundreds of companies that want to be the YouTube of VR, and no one's there yet, and they're probably not going to get there because YouTube is going to be the YouTube of VR. But for right now, we have a pretty good position, and we have a really attractive audience for people to connect with. So we'll distribute these films. And then I also think on the business model side, we're going to start seeing platforms spend money to get content onto their site, because Google, Facebook, Samsung, Oculus, they need to sell hardware. If you're going to buy a $100 headset, you have to have a reason to put it on every week, every day maybe. And so high quality content providers are actually in a really good space, where I think I read a stat that Oculus has spent $250 million last year, going to spend an equal amount this year. It's the same thing that happened with YouTube when they launched, right? They just gave tons of money to creators to try to seed the ecosystem and make sure that it worked. And, these are examples of a couple of the advertiser films that we've had. So GE, we created a film for them. Kia, they had a film. And we actually looked at the numbers for this recently. And advertiser films, which are sort of like clearly delineated as sponsored, it's not sponsored content, it's just a separate piece. But they're clearly delineated, and they perform really, really well in the app. Usually, people spend zero time looking at ads. And the drive is towards these sort of experiences that connect with people and get them to immerse themselves. And what we saw is that, in our top 10 films of the year, I think 4 of them were advertiser films. So we feel really good about that as a sustainable business model for ourselves. I guess I sort of sped through this. But the big thing is I don't know what the future looks like for VR. I don't think anyone does at this point. There are a lot of people that are making predictions. I don't think this is going to happen. I really hope it doesn't happen. But the question is, for people who are creating content, how at this point do you sort of hedge your bets, and how do you create things in a way that's sustainable, that sort of gets our mission across, but also connects with an audience and just makes sense for us. So the truth is, there are so many companies spending so much money on VR right now. I would be shocked if it doesn't pan out, because it's crazy to think that the leading tech companies could be wrong about this. So like I said, we'll continue to play in the mobile VR space. We will take steps to do more and more interesting things. Later this year, we're going to do some interactivity, really basic, choose your adventure style stuff, click on a hotspot over here, get moved to a different story. And then, probably once or twice a year, we'll start doing really heavy interactive pieces where it's computer generated, where you're using a controller or gaze on your headset to move through a space. But for now, we feel really good about where we are with 360 video, and we don't want to get too far ahead of the audience. So that's where we are. That's all I got. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you have any info on what's your demographics of people who are using it, or parts of the country, or aging?
So I don't have parts of the question was, do we have demographics on who's using it? I don't have parts of the country, but ages are skew really young. It's probably the youngest product that the Times has put out, mid-20s, early 30s, which is amazing for us, because I think the average age of our subscribers is in its low 50s. But it's younger, and it skews pretty equally male, female. But this is something that we are trying to get better about, especially for advertisers, because one of the things with VR right now is that we have a pretty healthy platform. We have 1 million people who've downloaded this app, but if you compare these view numbers to video view numbers, advertisers look at you kind of crazy. But so that you have to do 2 things there. One is you have to explain to them this is the very start of an ecosystem, and these views are just lower. There's a lot of friction involved in watching these things, especially in a headset. So you tell them that, and you also tell them that look, not that a smaller amount of people are watching this relatively, or absolutely, but they're spending so much time with the content that it's worth it. And I think the last thing is that this is the demo of people that you want to be in front of, right? Someone who's going to spend 8 minutes with a VR headset on probably has a lot of disposable income, someone that you want to talk to. So yeah, we're trying to use demographics more and more to bolster our case. Yeah.
Cool. How do you incorporate advertisers into these videos without disturbing the content or the experience?
Yeah, we actually don't include them in the editorial content at all. So the example of that piece in Iraq, the Fight for Fallujah piece, that when that piece was published, it was just the top spot in our app, which is sort of like an Instagram style feed of videos. And then there was sponsored content right below that. So you would go in, you'd watch the full Fallujah film, and then if you wanted to, you could duck back out and watch a GE film. We're never going to be able to put product placement in our videos, which is what a lot of the native business models look like for VR. It's just not something that we can do as journalists. So that's what it's looked like for us right now. We just can't embed it. But the Daily 360, for instance, which is the one video we publish every day, Samsung is sort of attached as a sponsor to that. So we have a title card at the beginning which says Daily 360, journalism by the New York Times, technology by Samsung, and then it sort of goes into the experience. But there was a pretty in-depth discussion over whether we should do that or not, because what we saw is that if you put any text on a video before it starts, view rates just go through the floor. Luckily, because 360 is sort of engaging enough as it is, we were able to duck that, and we didn't just put a black card up there with nothing behind it. It's sort of superimposed on a scene. So we can put like a sponsor's name at the start of a video, but I don't think we'd get any deeper than that in our editorial content.
Cool. Are there any like nations where VR is more prevalent than the U.S. and is there a reason why that is?
I don't know the right answer to that question. My guess would be that it's us and China, just given how many Chinese VR companies there are right now. I think Western Europe lags behind. We're way far out in front of the market on this one. So it's really the U.S. that we're targeting right now.
Hi, I have a question about, so when do you think your regular readers will start consuming actual VR, not 360 video, with a regular cadence?
I would say that hopefully early next year or the middle of next year. Like real VR involves, like if you're gonna buy an Oculus Rift, you have to have a super high-end computer and then spend almost $1,000 on a headset and controllers. I just think that eliminates a lot of the market right now. Like that price has to come down. Same with an HTC Vive. You have to have a super high-end computer. You've got to set up these light boxes all around. Like most people aren't going to do that. One thing that could really help accelerate this is PlayStation VR, which has a huge install base, something like 40 million PlayStations out there, with a headset on top of that isn't that much more expensive. It's like $300, $400, I think. So I think if that really takes off, you could see faster adoption. And I think the other thing that could drive this forward is if Apple steps in the market and presents something that no one's seen before. They tend to have a magic touch with devices like this and like slick hardware. So that could be one thing.
But they did say they were investing more in AR than VR. So how likely do you think that Apple will completely invest in VR?
So that's actually a big question that I have right now. So we spend all our time on 360, and then you see from the other end that folks are really interested in AR, and then there's like this little gap where you can do like interactive VR. And if you put on like a HoloLens, or even if you mess around with like Snapchat spectacles or face filters on Snapchat, you can see that AR it's a utility. You could wear glasses on your face all day that like pop up your LinkedIn profiles as I'm looking across this audience, and I could see that right away, whereas VR is such a different experience. So I'm actually super scared that we get to AR way too fast and VR sort of gets tucked into that and AR becomes more interesting. That being said, there are a lot of cool things that the New York Times can do with augmented reality, and we've started to think about that right now with like Google Tango devices and Microsoft HoloLens. It's probably a little too early for us to get in there. One of the other lessons we've taken away is that we're probably not going to be on the bleeding edge of anything, but what we're really good at is mainstreaming innovation. So Google Cardboard's a great example of that. We distributed 1 million and we sort of saw this flashpoint after that, and Google will say the same thing, that we really helped awareness of that product. So, I hope there's mainstream adoption. I think it relies on the mobile headsets getting a lot better for VR, but I think AR is going to subsume it pretty quickly.
How have the rates of engagement been for the daily 360 video? Like, are you seeing that people are using it more and more? And then have you actually seen that like engagement on the site has gone up as a result of that?
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers on engagement on the site to connect it back yet, but are people returning and watching the videos? Yes, and we can track that for users that are registered or subscribed. For the average person that comes in, it's difficult for us to sort of track day over day what they're doing. But we see hundreds of thousands of streams a week on these films, and we've seen pretty sustained engagement rates since we launched in November. I don't know if it's the same people, but it's the same quantity of people coming back. And it's actually been, I've seen a surprising number of people watch it on the desktop, just sort of scrolling around with their mouse, but a healthy amount in mobile too.
I read an article about the most recent sales figures for some of the VR, like Oculus was in the 200,000, they had the Vive in the 400,000, and the PlayStation VR was nearing 1 million. So is it mainly due to maybe like Sony has like maybe the right pricing for it, or is it the gaming industry is just the immersiveness of it is just really appealing for VR?
Yeah, so the question was, given some of the headset sales figures, why has Sony been able to sell so many more in the last couple months? Is it pricing or is it the audience? It's both. I think headset VR is really tailored towards game content right now. So if someone's already purchasing a game console, it's not that big of an upsell to get them to buy a headset. I also think the price point makes a big difference. I'm not going to spend $2,000 on a giant setup right now. But if I have an Xbox or if I have a PlayStation, maybe I buy a PSVR or I get a HoloLens on top of that. So I think it's both.
So I know that Times works with a lot of educators. I was wondering if you guys have started making content for students.
We've thought about it, and some of the content that we have. So Google has a team called Google Expeditions where they take Google content into classrooms. And that's something we might do with them, which is to take our Fallujah piece and have it taught in classrooms. The Pulitzer Center actually gave us a giant grant to write that huge article and to support some of that VR filmmaking. And as part of that, we built a lesson plan around it so that at secondary schools and colleges around the country, they'll read the full story and there'll be a lesson plan around it, and the VR is associated with that. So I don't think we'll ever make content that is like specifically geared towards students, but I think all of our journalism is pretty important information for being an educated citizen. So I could see a lot of it being used in classrooms, and I think it's on us to figure out how to partner with the right people to make that happen. Most school districts can't afford wild stuff, but if you give them 100 cardboard, they could put that to pretty good use.
There's like a huge push in education to just use technology every day now, so.
Yeah, so this could work for that. Okay. Oh, one more.
Speak into the mic, we are recording.
Thank you. So you were talking about how it's hard to have a long attention span when you're watching VR, and you referred to your phone, Twitter, Facebook, all different social media platforms. Mm-hmm. Do you foresee, and I know maybe this gets to more AR, but any social media component to VR or to the work New York Times is doing with VR?
So there are a lot of people who are trying to crack this, trying to crack social VR right now. So AltSpace is one of them, and the ideas that I've seen are, you're basically you and all your friends put on headsets and you watch the same thing at the same time, and you can chat with each other like in a room. That's okay if all your friends have headsets, but you're not going to get a lot of sharing or virality that way. I haven't really seen a great way to share anything in VR yet. It's something that frustrates me about our app. Like, you might watch this Fallujah piece, it might be great, but you've got to finish it, you've got to pop out, then you've got to share it. There's no sort of like one-touch sharing. I mean, this will inevitably happen with Facebook, because Facebook bought Oculus, and Oculus Home powers the Gear VR, and that is the first thing you see. You will eventually get like a social feed of everything that your friends are watching, and it'll be super easy just to share either into your timeline or into your newsfeed, back and forth like that. So I think it'll happen, but right now it's not there. As for the times, like in terms of what we would do with social, I think it'd be kind of cool to imagine a commenting space in VR. So if you're watching a 360 video, to be able to drop like a comment at a certain scene or in a certain place would be kind of cool, I think. Might not be. But that's one example I see for social for us. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. All right, up next we have Lindsay Albertson, Director of Ad Sales Research from ABC, Disney ABC Television Group, and she has a study on the impact of VR that she is going to share.
Okay, thank you. I was just saying to Varun that